Hey dudes, it's Lerald. Patch 3.26 is coming out in just a couple of days, and the new league mechanic is the Mercenaries of Trarthus, which is going to be as fun to use as it is difficult to say. Trarthus. Anyhow, there's a lot of conjecture about how strong these mercenaries are actually going to be. Will they be able to deal respectable amounts of damage? Are they going to be worth gearing up? Maybe. But realistically, they're probably going to wind up being used as free aura bots by most players, and that is my plan as well. So with that in mind, I have gone through every single unique item in the entire game on the PoE wiki and created a spreadsheet out of all of the items that I think could be useful. And so I am going to share this spreadsheet in the description of the video and do a walkthrough on what I think are the most important items to go for early on in the league, and also some chase items as well. I think this is an important exercise to do now before the league is out, and I will be updating this spreadsheet throughout the league based on feedback and personal testing, right? So let me know if you think I missed anything or if there's just any interactions that I should add in here. I didn't notice anyone else doing this. It seemed like a good idea for a community resource, so here it is. I guess I'll also add that Animate Guardian will also be available to use more easily for non-minion characters now that it doesn't destroy all of the equipped items when it dies. You can use a lot of these items for an AG in addition to a Merc. However, AGs are going to have some limitations, like they can't equip jewelry, mercenaries can. I can't remember if they can equip shields or not. Certainly anytime I ever used an AG, I always had them using a Kingmaker, so I think generally speaking, mercenaries are going to be a lot better than AGs. You won't have to invest into minions for a mercenary to be strong, all of that. So let's start with the Amulet tab. I have divided all the different types of items, slots, like item equip slots, into their own pages. You can see here, some of these are a little shorter than others. Rings and body armor are pretty long, but then Shield, there's a lot of decent shield options. Melee weapons, I had initially done this as swords. There was one sword that I thought was any good. There are no daggers that are any good. So yeah, that kind of got cut down and just condensed into individual pages. So I think the main thing that a lot of people are focusing in on as I've seen a couple of videos where the whole thing is just talking about this item right here, Perk Wolf's Toe. Nearby allies damage with hits is lucky. This seems like an absolutely insane amulet to throw onto a mercenary. You give yourself damage, lucky damage, as long as you're playing a hit build. If you're playing a dot build, which I am planning to, Toxic Rain Pathfinder is going to be totally out of luck on this. That won't apply to dots, but that's fine. This seems like it's going to be really good. It also is going to be very expensive, I think, because it's not a terribly uncommon unique. But yeah, with it being in such high demand, I think it's probably going to be pretty expensive early on in the league. And so that's the kind of rubric I've used for grading out these items. Here's how good I think it is without considering the price, more or less without considering the price. Certainly how irreplaceable is what it does. Getting lucky damage on all of your hits is crazy. The price is probably going to be very high. Then, is it offensive, defensive, or both? And then what it does, and then I threw a link into the wiki just to make it a little easier to look at. The Eternal Struggle, I think, is another option that potentially could be a budget alternative. It'll be a little bit more useful for non-hit builds as well, obviously. This is a unique that comes from the Black Star and the Infinite Hunger, and it comes randomly anointed with Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds implicits, and maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad. We don't know exactly how mercenaries are going to work if they have stats. We don't know if they have strength, dex, and we don't know if they have mana, if any of that matters or not. All right, I'm cutting in here in the middle of this edit. I was literally at the point in the video that you were just watching, editing, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go check the website and see if there was an update, and there was about an hour ago. And so we actually do know a little bit more. We still don't know about mana, whether that works or exists or is a thing to be concerned about. But we do know that mercenaries use a stat. They'll basically just be assigned, strength and dex, etc., or strength and dex, whatever. And they're only able to equip armor that corresponds to that attribute. That's kind of it for limitations, which is pretty good, very easy to use. And then other than that, still a lot left to discover, but we do know at least that. So I guess we'll have to bear that in mind when it comes to figuring out combinations of items. You can't use an int item and a dex item together because, well, I guess you could if you have an int dex mercenary, but yeah, you have to use items that make sense on the mercenary. So there it is. But getting 15% global defenses on your Mercenary seems like it's pretty damn good. And then crits inflicting Malignant Madness if you have an Eater of Worlds dominant one. That's pretty good. Malignant Madness is this bonus that reduces action speed and damage by 10%. Pretty good, right? The alternative, though, is just like, if it's a Searing Exarch dominant one, you just get 15% cull out of your Mercenary, which is cracked. Like, that's completely insane to get that out of an amulet that is pretty common, usually pretty cheap, because, like, you know, you just get random enchants on it. So I think that could be a really good option as well. So I put those both as like S tier necks. The next rank, the next tier here, it's a bit of a step down, is All's Uprising. So there's 3 versions of All's Uprising. All is a pretty rare boss out of Delve. So unless you're doing a lot of like 200 plus level delving, you're probably not going to ever see him. And it comes, like I said, comes in 3 versions. There's one for each of the 3 primary stats, and then they let you have like a free aura based on the stat. And so the reason that this is like an expensive neck is because of that free aura. So obviously, like, Malevolence is going to be a lot more valuable of an All's Uprising than like Purity of Lightning or something. Wrath, Zealotry, those are pretty expensive. But you can get one that's just like crappy, like free Purity of Lightning or free Clarity or something, although that might actually be expensive. But anyways, like a free bad aura version of this. And it probably won't be as expensive as like some of the good auras, but I think given that the bonus is 50% increased crit chance against nearby enemies, you know, that's a pretty big bonus to crit chance. I think this is going to wind up being, because it is rare and because it is pretty strong, this is going to be a pretty expensive neck. But it is a good value, you know, 50% increased crit chance. That's a pretty strong bonus to get out of a neck. I think a budget option you can go with, if like Perkwill's Toe is prohibitively expensive early on, is Zoph's Heart. You can just get this by doing Zoph. It's not really that rare from Zoph, and it just makes it so that nearby enemies are covered in ash. This is only going to be useful if you're playing a fire damage build, but it is a pretty big damage increase for fire damage taken, and then also like it's a move speed slow. So just applying that by default is pretty nice. I think probably like something that you'll be able to get during the campaign with any sort of decent amount of luck is a Shaper Seed. This is like a very crappy neck, right? 4% of life regen per second for you and nearby allies, and then a big mana regen rate increase, and that's literally it. Just totally defensive value, but something that you can very, very easily solo self-find. Then I wanted to include just like 2 other little honorable mentions here. Ignimon. Nearby enemies are blinded. This is not great on its own, but there are some other things where this can synergize and actually be very, very, very good at being able to just guarantee that things are blinded in order to trigger some other effects later on. Pull with bows, kind of whatever. And then Yoke of Suffering is one that comes from a tier 17 boss, Nightmare the Unbreakable. That's the fortress map. So pretty rare, pretty expensive item. Very, very good item. Enemies take 5 to 10% increased damage for each type of ailment you have inflicted on them. Your elemental damage can shock. Your ailments last 30% reduced duration of ailments, right? So this means that, like, whatever, you know, if you put this on a mercenary, they'll be able to shock. That's guaranteed. And then if they're doing fire or elemental damage, fire or cold damage, I should say, they'll be able to ignite or chill. You know, potentially they could be able to poison and bleed if you're getting that. So you might be able to inflict anywhere from like 2 to 5 ailments realistically with a mercenary. The problem is it's actually pretty hard to get like all of those onto a single build. I don't know that mercenaries are really going to be constructed in such a way without quite a bit of work in order to like get more than about 2 or 3 effects. So if you're getting 2 or 3 effects, you know, it's like, it was a good roll, 20 to 30% increased damage. It's okay. But generally speaking, this is a neck that you just want to wear on a character you're playing and get like bleed and poison and like usually you would use like a Secrets of Suffering and get like Brittle Sap, Scorch, and then just try and get like the Chill and Shock or Chill and Ignite. I guess Chill and Shock from like Skitterbots can work. That's what I've done in the past league. So I was getting like Chill Shock from Skitterbots, which counted for me, then Scorch, Brittle Sap, bleed, and I don't think I was getting poison, but maybe, you know, that's a lot of inflicted debuffs. Now, the important thing here is it does say that enemies just take increased damage for each ailment you've inflicted on them, so it's not increased damage taken from you. unless it's not working correctly. This does mean that it would work on a mercenary, but it seems like it would be kind of difficult to actually get it to like really work super well. And it's also just a very expensive neck. So potentially there's something there. Maybe it could even be better than Perkwolf's Toe if you're able to get lucky damage in some other way. But you know, I kind of have my doubts. Definitely it's up against pretty stiff competition. All right, belts are like a lot simpler, lot easier category here. I think Calm's Binding is just like categorically better than everything else. What it does is it makes nearby enemies convert 25% of their fizz damage to fire. So if you are using armor, in this game, the armor calculations are fairly complex. Basically, it just boils down to armor is more effective against smaller hits. So anything you can do to convert physical damage into anything else will make your armor more effective against the remaining physical damage left over. But if you're taking, like, if you have literally 0 armor and you took like 100 damage physical hit, then that's just 100 times 1, right? You just take 100 damage. If you were to take 100 damage or 100 physical damage, but only 75% of it was physical, then that would be 100 times 0.75. And then the other 25% would be converted to fire, so that'd be 25 times. If you have the normal 75% fire resistance, that would be 25 times 0.25, so 6.25 plus 75. So that's like 81.25 damage that you would get. So you'd be getting like 19% damage reduction if you have absolutely no armor at all. You're getting like 18 to 19% damage reduction out of this belt being on a mercenary. And this is generally a really common, really bad belt. It just happens to be insanely good if you're putting it onto a mercenary to make you take a lot less damage. So I'm a big fan of this. I think this is like first ballot Hall of Fame among belts. I don't think anything else is going to be able to compete, but there are a couple of options. Belt of the Deceiver seems like it could be pretty good if you're playing an attack-based build. You know, it gives 30% reduced extra damage taken from crits. That's potentially pretty good for keeping your merc alive. And then some like life and resistances don't seem bad. Global fizz damage, if you have a fizz damage merc, that's okay. But nearby enemies are intimidated. That's 10% attack damage on all nearby enemies. You don't have to worry about getting intimidate from any other source. So I think that could be pretty good too. There is a bad version of Calm's Binding as well, like a bad alternative to an already cheap and pretty easily attainable belt, just in case Calm's Binding suddenly is super rare and super hard to get your hands on. You could go with a Pyroshock Clasp. If you have Ignite and Shock on your mercenary, then they ignite and shock the enemy, and that converts a large chunk of the fizz damage into fire or lightning. If you're able to get both, cool. The duration of elemental ailments being longer is okay, but obviously this is a lot more situational than what you get out of Calm's Binding. Then the other two I don't really think are particularly useful. The idea of using Coward's Chains and having your mercenary curse with vulnerability, and then using other items to reduce the curse effect on them, and then just getting the benefit of like damage of enemies hitting you is unlucky. Counting is on full life all the time. There's a lot of potential to synergize there with the Coward's Chains and make something useful out of it, but I haven't really figured out anything that seems all that great yet. And then Rizlatha's Coil just seems like it would be good if you play like a physical damage mercenary that, like, let's say mercenary damage is actually good. Rizlatha's Coil is really good on physical damage characters. You know, it's this. More max fizz, less min fizz, a lot of fizz, a lot of life, a lot of strength, and get life when you stun, and you're going to be stunning a lot. So, you know, could be good. Don't know that it will be. All right, I'm not going to run through every single one of these rings. All the stuff at the bottom of the list, you know, it's at the bottom of the list for a reason, right? I think it could be situationally useful and it's cheap, but that's kind of it. Call of the Void is a ring that Ben made after winning, you know, one of the million events that he's won, and it's absolutely insane, but it doesn't have any sort of built-in damage stats, so it doesn't really get used very much. Like if I just look it up here on PoE Ninja, it is a 20 Chaos unique, even though it comes from Uber Elder, and it's relatively rare. The way it works is, you know, all damage that you deal with hits can chill, all damage you take from hits can chill you. Enemies that you chill can be shattered as though they're frozen, so they don't have to be frozen. They will shatter when they die. And then also enemies chilled by your hits lessen their damage dealt by half of the chill effect. So anything you can do to boost chill effect is going to basically work like Sap, the alternate lightning elemental ailment. So it's a big damage reduction source, right? And then you get the ability to chill regardless of what type of damage you're doing. So you can have a mercenary who's doing like lightning or physical damage, being able to chill enemies and reducing their damage and making them shatterable so that when they die, they don't do like annoying corpse explosion effects. So this is very good. The only real downside is that they can be chilled by all damage taken from hits. Pretty easy to fix. You just mix that with dream fragments. There are a lot of ways to be freeze and chill immune, but Mercenary being freeze and chill immune seems like it's going to be really good. So I think dream fragments is going to be another S tier item as well. This might be fairly expensive early on in the league, but it's really not an uncommon unique ultimately. So outside of the early days of the league, I think this will be pretty cheap. Pretty good combo, right? You combine those two together, and now you have a mercenary who's like a massive chill bot that's also a damage reduction layer, and they're chill and freeze immune themselves. Shavron's Revelation is a ring that's kind of hard to use. If you use it in the right ring slot, you get energy shield regeneration, like a lot of it, 6% a second, which is crazy if you have a big ES pool, so this could be good on the right merc. It makes it so that you can't regenerate mana, which may not do anything. That may not be a downside at all for mercs, or it may completely brick them. At this point, I just don't know. So this could be really good. It could be absolutely worthless. We'll have to see. I assume that mercenaries will be affected by Reflect on maps, so I think Sibyl's Lament can be really helpful for making them be pretty close to Reflect immune, 80% reduced reflected damage. And yeah, something to, I guess, have to keep in mind. Doesn't that seem fun? And then I already mentioned Kikazaru, reduced effective curses from the belt section. Kikazaru would be the way that I would accomplish a lot of that. I will just also mention the Gratis Signet. This is something from Necropolis League that's been pretty terrible. It gives you, like, when you crit with an attack, you get Unnerve. Unnerve is 10% increased spell damage on enemies. And then the opposite is true. When you crit with a spell, you get Intimidate, 10% increased attack damage. So for this to work, you would have to be like doing attacks that crit, but then mainly doing spell damage, or doing spells that crit, but then mainly doing attack damage. Doesn't really work very well. Was never like worth devoting a ring slot to. But you can put this onto like an attacking mercenary as a spellcaster yourself, and it's just all benefit. So 10% damage increase, I think that's pretty good. It's a pretty common ring, so I think that's pretty solid. Probably should actually be in the A tier now that I think about it, so I think I'll be bumping that up. Seems like a pretty cheap, easy way to get 10% more damage. Then Polaric Devastation. This comes only from one of the like lesser, I think it's a Black Star. Yeah, the Searing Exarch boss, mini boss, if you will. It makes it so that like when you ignite an enemy, they get covered in ash. Makes them take more fire damage, 20% more fire damage, which is pretty good. If you cover them in frost, if you freeze them, then they get affected by covered in frost. 20% cold damage taken, 50% less crit chance isn't bad. So I think this is something that could be useful. A little bit of an uncommon ring, but not super high demand normally. So this could be useful for mercenaries, maybe. Pretty much only if you're playing like a cold or a fire build, though. All right, body armor, that's another one that's got like a long list of stuff. I will just mention a couple of things down here at the bottom. Death Oath, I'm pretty confident won't work. It's basically just like, what if Righteous Fire was a body armor that's not very good? I love it, I'm a huge fan, but it's not a strong build. I don't think this will work. I don't think any sort of trigger skills, like skills that are built into items, will work on mercenaries. But if it does, for some reason, then this is getting used by me, and it does come with a downside of burning some health away. I'll just have to figure out how to get life back on mercenaries in order to use this, because I love Death Oath, but again, don't think it'll work. Duriani's Prototype makes it so that lightning resistance of monsters is equal to yours, and then lightning resistance doesn't help reduce lightning damage taken. You have to use like very high armor stacking. So what you can do is you can use like a Duriani's Prototype and then Ventress Gamble rings with specifically negative lightning resistance rolls to like lower your lightning resistance below 0, and use that to like reduce monsters' lightning resistance down to below 0. This is pretty risky because there are some sources of lightning damage over time. And Doriani's only applies to the damage from hits, so anything that deals lightning damage over time is going to absolutely shred you. It also makes it so that you have to deal lightning damage too, so I don't think this will be good for mercenaries. I think it'll just get them killed, but I know it's something some people are planning on playing around with. Lightning Coil, I think, similarly, is like a really good body armor for players, for like converting a lot of phys damage taken into lightning, you know, for all the same reasons that the Calm's Binding Belt is good. The issue is just that it comes with minus 60 lightning res. That's a big downside to overcome on an NPC that doesn't have access to the passive tree or like jewels and stuff, so I don't think it'll be any good, but you know, maybe. Zendithus Cassock is like a really janky body armor that really the only reason you would use this is just that when you block, you create consecrated ground, and that can have some benefits elsewhere. Kind of get to that in a minute. Don't think Blunderbore will be good, but you know, it could be. I don't think Gruthkul's Pelt will be good either. I think this will be like totally worthless build bricking item, but maybe it'll be good. It has the downside of your spell skills deal no damage and are disabled. But then it has some really huge upsides. Huge global physical damage increase, max life increase, 10% of life per second regen, 15% character size in case you want to be huge. So if your mercenary doesn't have any spell skills, like if they don't have any auras or anything, or if this just for whatever reason doesn't turn off their auras like it normally does, but like if for whatever reason you have like a big tanky mercenary who is able to use like war cries, which they're still allowed, they're not counted as spells, and then just like slams or whatever, this could be a great piece. It'll make them insanely tanky, 10% of life per second. That's huge. They'll be large, so they'll just literally be harder for monsters to get around to get to you, and then you know all the benefits that come with everything else there. I think Brass Dome seems like it's going to be a pretty good cheapo option. Just no extra damage from crits. Pretty simple. You get a bit of max extra max LE res. These are very expensive with good rolls, you know, like 5%, but with bad rolls are usually quite cheap. I think just getting like a huge amount of armor on a mercenary, and then no extra damage from crits, that's all that this is, but I think that could be pretty good for just like a very cheap way to get your mercenary much, much tankier. Expedition's End is, you know, it's the name seems like it would come from Expedition, but it actually comes from Heist. It's quite expensive normally. You know, you're able to freeze with all damage, you freeze, so dealing a lot more damage, and you automatically chill nearby enemies. This seems pretty good for throwing onto a mercenary. I think that could be, again, another source of just a lot of crowd control. Now, I think the two main things that really stand out from body armors, though, are Garber of the Ephemeral and Doppelganger Guise. I think Doppelganger Guise is probably the better of the two in terms of making your mercenary super tanky, up to 40% less physical and chaos damage taken. They get the Unhinged skill, but by default, you just count as sane. So unless this is bricked in some way in the league where in a way that it isn't with Animate Guardians right now, this will just give you, you know, 30 to 40% less physical damage and chaos damage taken, which is awesome. And then also it'll give your mercenary 10% of life over 1 second whenever they get hit. This doesn't stack, but it can benefit from like increases to regen speed, which you can get like as like stats on some pieces of gear. So a recovery rate, I think, is the name of the stat. So, you know, this can potentially be like a massive amount of life regen and also damage reduction. Basically a better version of Gruthkul, but, you know, also probably quite a bit more expensive because I think people are going to be going for this a lot more than crappy old Gruthkul. The other one is Garber the Ephemeral. This comes from regular Cortex map, and it's pretty rare. I don't think I've ever seen one drop. I don't remember ever seeing one drop. And yeah, you gain a divine charge on hit. When you hit 10 charges, you gain divinity. It gives you like more damage. You get larger, you take less damage, and you are immune to curses. Cool. The real value here, though, is just simply that nearby allies' action speed can't be modified to below base value. Huge. You're no longer temporal changeable or freezable. And nearby enemies can't deal crits. So again, it kind of just makes you crit immune. Pretty good. I think Doppelganger Guise is clearly better for your mercenary survival. Garber the Ephemeral's better for you, the player's survival. Both seem pretty good. I think Expedition's End is also like a pretty good option as well, but maybe not quite as good. All right, boots are up next. Boots are like a pretty big category with a lot of like okay options in here. I definitely threw a bunch of stuff in here that seemed like maybe there's some potential synergies in here. I think the things that really stood out to me, though, are just like the top 4. Olros Charge being like a pair of boots that give you ward, and then whenever the ward breaks, you get adrenaline. That's like attack damage, physical damage reduction, I think attack speed as well. Yeah, like attack, cast, and move speed. Just a lot of a damage increase for mercs. So that could potentially be a good option for a pair of boots that usually aren't really worth all that much. Wake of Destruction's like the cheapest boots in the entire game, and they drop shock ground. Free extra damage just for having your mercenary running around. Nothing wrong with that. Ralakesh's Impatience are getting nerfed. In the coming league, they're being made to only count as though you have either Endurance or Frenzy or Power Charges rather than all 3. But they're also getting immunity to Corrupted Blood and move speed back, since you're not going to be able to have jewels for your Mercenary. That Corrupted Blood immunity is actually pretty good. And then you can just get like an Endurance charge, Ralakesh's Impatience, and there you go. Now your Merc is counting as so they have full Endurance charges. You can even get some plus Endurance charge stuff on them, and that'll make them quite a lot tankier. This will probably be pretty expensive, though. The other option is Legacy of Fury. This comes from regular Maven, and the way it works is it causes nearby enemies to be scorched, period. Scorch is -10 to all elemental resistances, and then it's got 30 to 50% increased effect, so it's -13 to -15. And then also there's a chance when you kill a scorched enemy to burn all the surrounding enemies for pretty decent amount of damage, like 8% of their life as fire damage per second for 4 seconds, so 32% of their life. And that's pretty amazing. I don't know if it'll work on player kills or if it has to only be the mercenary kills, so this part might not work, but the rest of the boots are still really amazingly strong if you're playing any sort of elemental damage at all. So Legacy of Fury seemed like the number one, the front runner, the first ballot Hall of Fame of all of the boots options available in the game to me. All right, then there are really, I think, 2 standout options for me in the gloves section. That would be Aseneth's Gentle Touch. I think this is the pair of gloves that are going to be like the go-to. They're not super common, but they're not insanely rare. I think they're a tier 1 unique, but they're definitely not like T0 or anything. You know, it's like Int Life Mana, whatever. The big deal here is that it is a built-in curse with Temp Chains on hit. And then the Temp Chains is not removed from dying enemies. Enemies near corpses affected by the curses are blinded, and enemies killed near the corpses explode. So you get built-in explode, you get built-in Temp Chains, and you get built-in blind. Now there's a downside to this, which is like if you're trying to use another curse, there are a couple of ways to get curses. You can just get curse out of your merc. You can like have a curse on hit ring and put it on them. They'll apply the curse. As long as they don't die, you're getting the curse, and you're not even having to devote a ring slot to it. Cool. But there is a curse limit to contend with. So if you have a curse limit of 1 and the mercenary applies Temp Chains, and then you hit the enemy with a different curse, depending on what curse it is, the curse priority is going to kick in, and you may not be able to apply your curse. I think Temp Chains is at the start of the line, so I think you will be able to overwrite the Temp Chains, but then that means that their Aseneth isn't going to work, right? So the only way that this really works if you still want to apply your own curse is you have to have a curse limit of 2, which is not that hard to get, right? There are a lot of options for getting that. You can get Whispers of Doom is like the most obvious one. You just anoint Whispers of Doom, pretty good on any build, and now they'll still be able to have that Temp Chains from the Mercenary, and then you can also apply whatever you're using, Despair or whatever. With that being said, you get built-in Blind, you get built-in Explodey. Very good pair of gloves. Definitely think they're going to be like a absolute must use on pretty much any mercenary that's not running Gravebind. And that is the other one that I think is potentially a must use, or maybe an absolutely worthless item. Nearby enemies killed by anyone count as being killed by you instead. So the reason that you would use this on the mercenary is there are a lot of people who think that mercenaries, you might be able to stack a bunch of item rarity on them, like as many item rarity pieces as you possibly can, Vendor's Gamble and stuff, and then use Gravebind and turn him into a Magic Find character. I've also heard some people say that NPCs cannot benefit from item rarity, and so this would actually have the exact opposite of the intended effect. It would basically give you 0% item rarity on all drops. Ultimately, I don't know right now. I'm not able to like log in and test and see if mercenaries work that way. We haven't gotten an FAQ response from GGG on whether whether it'll work that way or not. So this is the only thing that I've put in the whole sheet that's related to Magic Find, and we'll just have to see whether it works or not. Everything else here is just kind of like some built-in, like, you know, extra damage stuff. All right, helms are another spot with a lot of good contenders. More of an offensive spot. Crown of the Tyrant also comes from all the Crystal King in Delves, and this is a very weird helmet. Very expensive. It's a one-socket helmet. It gives -10 all res to all nearby enemies, and then you and your nearby allies get a pretty large amount of flat added damage of a type, depending on what color socket is in the helm, that one socket that's there. So pretty easy to just add a bunch of flat fire, cold, lightning, or even chaos damage and negative resistances. It just seems like an incredible offensive helm to throw into a merc. An alternative, a defensive alternative, one of my faves, comes from Uber Maven now, and it's Viridi's Veil. If you're wearing a magic ring, you get damage hitting you is unlucky. Insanely strong defensive bonus, and then if the magic ring's in the right slot, you get hexproof as well. If it's in the left slot, no extra damage from crit strikes. You can swap that back and forth. I'm also assuming that that will work correctly in the mercenary setup. You know, we don't know for sure that it will, but I hope. In the past, I have played builds where I used a Viridi's Veil and I used magic ring in both slots, both left and right, in order to get hexproof and no extra damage from crits and damage against you hitting you is unlucky. Really, really awesome defensive set of bonuses, so definitely something that could be useful for keeping a mercenary alive and allowing them to like support you elsewhere. Other than that, a lot of this is just like, you know, offensive stuff. A very good, cheap one that I think a lot of people use is Learcast. I'll even move that up to the top of the A section. I think that's just going to be a really good one to like throw in for, you know, like a 1 chaos unique, big damage bonus for yourself. And then after that, you know, there are a couple of other ones like Flame Sight, Gale Sight, and Thunder Sight all make it so that you're not able to ignite, but you can scorch. You're not able to freeze and chill, but you're able to inflict brittle. Can't shock, but you can sap. I think those are all potentially useful if you're using an element that's the same as your mercenary. You can get the alternative debuff. Scorch is just a really good bonus. Brittle's also pretty good though. Flat additive crit, that can be pretty good too. Eye of Malice is one other one, giving cold exposure, fire exposure, you know, whichever. The nearby enemies have increased fire and cold resistances seems bad, but it will multiply negative resistances. It even says it in the top line here. So if your enemy has 10 resistance to fire, then that would go up to 15. But if they have -10, it'll go down to -15. So really good if you have enough setup, and being able to get this out of a mercenary and then wear a real helm yourself is pretty good. There are a lot of good shields, but I think the ones that really stood out to me are just the two Victario's Charity items. There's both the regular and the replica. The regular one makes it so that you get like increased area of aura skills, so that could potentially be good if you have a mercenary who has a lot of auras, and then chance to grant a power charge to nearby allies on kill, chance to grant frenzy charge to nearby allies on hit. Awesome, you got built-in power charge and frenzy charge generation. Cool. Replica Victario's Charity, increased aura effect instead of area, and then chance to grant endurance charges to nearby allies on hit, and chance to grant frenzy charges on kill. So again, just built-in charge generation and, you know, some pretty good defensive stats too. So I think those two really stand out to me as just being super, 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 super good. One thing that I did want to mention in here, though, that has a pretty cool synergy is Broken Faith. This works with that body armor, the Zandithus Cassock, that crappy consecrated ground when you block. Body armor Broken Faith makes it so that you generate Profane Ground instead of Consecrated Ground. Profane Ground gives you 100% increased crit chance and 10% increased curse effect on enemies standing in the ground. So pretty big offensive bonus out of that synergy. So maybe there's something there for somebody who wants to take advantage of that. You know, Broken Faith, not a super common shield, so might be a little expensive to get set up, but potentially there to get your crit chance way up. I'll also point out Leper's Alms here, just for the moment. This is going to come in to play, I think, on the next page, basically. All right, so here we have all the melee weapons. Kingmaker is one that people are really looking at. This has always been a favorite of people playing with an Animate Guardian, and for good reason. It gives you, it gives nearby allies 30% increased item rarity, Culling Strike, 50% crit multi, and 10 fortification. This is not maximum fortification, so this is worthless on a champion, but it is fantastic if you're not playing a champion or playing with a champion. Huge offensive bonus, magic find bonus, defensive bonus, really just amazing stuff. It's expensive. You have to find a soul taker and a heartbreaker and then vendor them together with an orb of fusing, so it's going to be expensive as hell. Everybody's going to want this axe. It's expensive even when people aren't, like, when it's not in super high demand, and with it being in super high demand, it's just going to be very expensive. So an alternative that's probably not that much cheaper is the Dark Seer. This is a weapon that has like a lot of different versions of it that can drop from Sanctuary map, the boss of Sanctuary map, so it is a tier 17 boss. The different versions are like the combinations of energy shield and life and mana, maybe, whatever, per level. I think it's ES, life, and mana per level, any combination of those stats. And what you get out of this is you get the chance to blind enemies on hit, 10% global chance to blind enemies on hit, and enemies blinded by you have Malediction. Malediction is 10% reduced damage dealt and 10% increased damage taken. So huge bonus. And this is why I put in earlier on the Ignomon and just a lot of the other things that interact with blind, the ability to just have built-in blind and have permanent malediction coming from this scepter on a mercenary seems very strong to me. Another thing, the reason I mentioned Leper's Alms a moment ago, is the Sign of the Sin Eater. Generally a pretty worthless unique with a cool bit of art. Enemies inflict elemental ailments on you instead of nearby allies. Awesome. Perfect synergy with the Leper's Alms, where when you have an elemental ailment on you, you deal damage with any attack. It will then transfer those ailments onto the enemy that you hit. So you have this combo of Sign of the Sin Eater eating all of the ailments onto the Merc, and then Leper's Alms redistributing those ailments back onto the enemies. Cool. If you're then able to get like some freeze immunity so they're not getting like frozen out of dream fragments, there you go. Perfect combo where you have this like really fun kind of cycle of stealing debuffs away from the player, you know, keeping them safe and then putting them back onto enemies. I think most of the melee weapons that were left all seemed pretty crappy to me. I didn't see anything that really seemed all that great. Then there was one final bit of an interaction here. This is really like the thing that made me go, this is all worth it, was this quiver here, Ahuana's Bite. Normally, terrible quiver. It was added in Ancestor League, just awful, right? You know, barely adds any damage at all. Enemies chilled by your hits have damage taken increased by chill effect. Chill enemies as though dealing 60 to 100% more damage. So on its own, as a quiver that you would use as like a ranger build, seems bad. But as something you could throw onto a bow-based mercenary, and now you have them chilling enemies, increasing damage based on that chill effect, effectively turning chill into both chill and shock at the same time, and then also getting much larger chill. There's a lot of synergy here with some other items like Pain Seeker gloves that give you non-damaging ailments inflicted as though you're doing 100 to 200% more damage. Also, the potential interaction with the ring, Call of the Void, where now you're getting like damage reduction out of chill as well, and you're getting chill out of any type of damage rather than just cold damage, and just a lot of value there to be had for sure. Like you're getting damage reduction, and you're actually slowing the enemy. So all of that seems really good. I don't really think any of the other bows or quiver uniques seem all that great, so I'd probably just try and use this with a very strong rare bow on a ranger-styled mercenary. And then the final thing I ran across in the wand section was just Tollborn. Cold exposure you inflict applies an extra 12% reduction to cold resistance. You know, it's, I think by default, the cold exposure that you would get is just like 10%. If you were using Eye of Malice, you get 10% cold resistance reduction, so Tollborn would take that up to 22%. It's kind of it. Not the greatest thing in the world, but yeah, that was about all I could come up with for wands. Eclipse Solaris is another way to get nearby enemies to just be permanently blinded, so that is also an option as well. I think, generally speaking, what I'm going to be trying to go for is pretty much all of the stuff in the like S tier and A tier, especially early on, the cheaper stuff that's kind of higher on the list. You know, maybe some of this was probably more defensive than offensive, to be honest, but just kind of orienting toward as much damage reduction as I can get out of my Mercenary, and then any extra damage that I can add in as well, sure, why not? Alright, so that's the spreadsheet. Be sure to comment if you notice any interactions you think that I should add. Like I said in the intro, the plan here is for this to be a living document that lasts throughout the entire league. And that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more like it, and if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching. Bye.